welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad Tehami. Now, the world leaders and the government representatives and the delegates are gathered in Dubai, United Arab Emirates, to attend the COP28, which is the annual United Nations Climate Change Summit. And this summit is going to be run for 13 days, in which over 140 heads of states and over 70,000 participants are going to be in attendance. And this particular summit is going to take the stock take of the progress towards the Paris Climate Agreement and the materialization of the loss and damage fund, which was established in the last year's COP27. Now, there are four major themes for this year's Conference of the Parties, which is a primary decision-making body of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Now, COP28 President Sultan Al Jaber opened the summit and acknowledged that there are strong views about the idea of including language on fossil fuels and renewables in the negotiated texts. Also, Pakistan's caretaker Prime Minister Mr. Anwarul Haq Kakar is leading Pakistan's delegation at this historic summit. And according to Pakistan's Foreign Office, he is going to present Pakistan's vision and the efforts regarding climate change. He has spoken to the international broadcaster CNN. Before heading into the discussion, let's watch what caretaker Prime Minister Mr. Anwarul Haq Kakar had to say.
Chief has said that Pakistan is responsible for less than 1% of greenhouse gas emissions, but its people are 15 times more likely to die from climate-related disasters than people elsewhere. That was brought to light in 2022, when 1/3 of the country was submerged as deadly floods spread across the South Asian nation. Now, of course, we are against the backdrop of a vital climate conference this week, and at COP27, the last edition, Pakistan joined other developing nations and played a key role in advocating for this global loss and damage fund that we have been talking about to help countries recover from climate-induced disasters. And as we've been reporting in the last few hours, delegates here in Dubai at COP28 have formally adopted that fund. This morning, before that announcement was made, I sat down with Pakistan's interim Prime Minister in Dubai to discuss how last year's flooding exposed Pakistan's vulnerabilities. Have a listen.
The reality check was there, and we knew at that moment that climate change is no more a fashionable conversation point. It has hit us at home, and it had hit us hard. At the same time, we did realize that we are not the one who are primarily responsible for contributing and bringing this climate disaster, in which two of our provinces of Sindh and Balochistan particularly were stuck in. And then I think so the sense of resilience was also there, that yes, it has happened.
To your mind, what will success or failure look like here in Dubai when it comes to loss and damage?
I think so. First of all, that the success would be that everyone, if we can make everyone realize that the differential part of this funding, that it should not be linked with the development funds with multilateral entities. Rather, the climate financing should be treated on merit, and it should be additional, and the contributions should come in tangible and real terms.
From whom? And how should it work?
Well, everyone knows who have been contributors in the last 1 century. So it is more of a question of an honest conversation rather than passing judgments on countries and economies. So I think so. If a sense of responsibility comes from wealthy nations themselves, that would be more a welcome step.
Should it be operationalized by the United Nations or by the multilateral banks?
Well, if we wait for the framework of the United Nations, I think so it will take years and years and years. So it can be phased and it can morph later on to the UN agencies. But initially, I think so, if it is committed and it is operationalized even under Fund or World Bank, multilateral, anyone, its initiation is more important rather than talking about the framework.
Give me an example of a good, honest, smart conversation that Pakistan is having with another country at this point that will provide a partnership opportunity
First
for
of
Pakistan.
all, agreement on loss and damage fund was probably the initiation of an honest conversation. So that financing in specific projects like our Living Indus initiative, our focus on transforming our coal-based plants to renewable energy would be sort of areas which would attract interest. Countries here in GCC, maybe UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, or others, and the settled economies and democracies on the Western Hemisphere. So it's an opportunity for all of them and for all of us.
Now, we just watched what caretaker Prime Minister Mr. Anwarul Haqqar had to say in his interview at CNN. Very important points raised by Prime Minister, which will definitely take up for discussion. The major outcome on the very first day of this historic COP28 is that COP28 has formally launched the Loss and Damage Fund. This particular Loss and Damage Fund has been approved by all the COP partners, and Pakistan has lauded this approval as a historic achievement. Now, it was because of Pakistan's efforts, since Pakistan was hit by devastating floods back in summer 2022. Almost 1/3 of the country was affected because of those devastating floods, and huge damage and destruction was caused because of those floods back in summer 2022. And then the United Nations also launched flash appeals urging the international community, especially the developed world, in order to help Pakistan come out of a crisis. Not only this, but also help Pakistan in building resilience against the climate catastrophes. Now, there are certain very important points which have been raised regarding the operationalization of this particular loss and damage fund. The Prime Minister has said that the success of loss and damage fund lies in that it should not be linked with the development funds. And there needs to be a sense of responsibility when it comes to the major powers in the world. Also, he said that Pakistan is focused on transferring coal with renewable energy. Also, we'll be talking about these very significant points and the kind of efforts and the kind of position Pakistan holds when it comes to this particular phenomenon of climate change that the entire world faces. We are honored to have been joined in the studio by Mr. Waqar Sherazi, his expert disaster response. Mr. Waqar, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Also in the studio at the same time, we are honored to have been joined by Mr. Umar Farooq, his policy analyst. Mr. Umar, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. Now, let's begin the discussion with these very significant points highlighted by Prime Minister during his interview regarding the operationalization of the loss and damage fund. Mr. Waqar, how do you see now on the very first day of this particular historic summit, all the members of the COP28 have approved this loss and damage fund. The efforts were spearheaded by Pakistan in particular.
Jawad, before starting the debate, let us recall that in COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, Pakistan was the country who put the convention on the table that loss and damage fund should be made part of the agenda. As we know that previously, after 2016, according to the Paris Agreement, the loss and damage fund had to be part of the COP agenda, but coincidentally it was not on the agenda list. In 2027, Pakistan was the one who asked that COP is incomplete without loss and damage funds. And it is a diplomatic victory for Pakistan, as the COP28 starts with approval of $575 million for though it is a symbolic amount in terms of volume, but it is a significant move that the world has agreed to the loss and damage fund. And let us reiterate for our audience that what loss and damage fund stands for. It is from the developed countries towards the underdeveloped countries who are not responsible for the climate change, who are not contributing much in the climate change, but who are in the frontline countries who are facing the climate-induced calamities. So I think it's a great victory for the whole world and for the developing countries especially.
Right, Mr. Umar, what's your understanding regarding this? First of all, when you talk about Pakistan's position, vis-a-vis when we talk about the kind of toll the climate change and the climate catastrophes are having on Pakistan, despite being less than 1% contributor to the emissions, but still being one of those top 10 countries who are vulnerable to climate change. Specifically, how do you see the efforts over the last couple of years when it comes to Pakistan's authorities?
So the initiative by the government to promote the loss and damage fund is obviously very commendable, and it took a lot of effort to get this across. As Mr. Waqar pointed out, that this should have been approved long ago. However, it was not, and it is a huge diplomatic victory. However, it is a start. It's a very small start. So, for instance, in 2009, in Copenhagen, developed countries agreed to a fund of $100 billion a year, but that never materialized. And even though inflation has obviously devalued the dollar as well, even now developing countries are asking for $100 billion. So it's starting off with less than $1 billion, but it is a good start. Another thing with the operations of the fund, which would be a concern, is that no provision has been made yet for replenishing of these funds. So it is not, as of right now, the fund is not sustainable unto itself. It is a one-time contribution which has been announced by these countries. So we need to make this fund operational, and as the Prime Minister said, that it needs to be done in a manner which cuts down the red tape to the least possible amount. It should not be boggled down. Like, for instance, this is something closer to disaster relief. So if the World Bank, for instance, is administering these funds, the World Bank is accustomed to accountability, is accustomed to stringent fiscal behavior. This is more like humanitarian aid, so this has to be more flexible. If the UN can do it quickly and effectively, that's obviously great. But for instance, if the World Bank or the IMF is administering it, there are real concerns as to the political will that is governing those organizations.
Right, Mr. Waqar, what's your understanding is Prime Minister has suggested that the operationalization should be phased through the UN agencies. What do you understand of that?
Well, as my colleague has mentioned, that at the moment the developing countries, the amount of funds developing countries receiving under loss and damages or under the climate finance by the developed countries is less than the amount the underdeveloped countries has to pay annually for servicing their debts. So I think that there is a serious lack of commitment by the international community in understanding the situation, that how the developed countries are contributing in emission of greenhouse gases and resultantly in global increase of the temperature, which is the actual cause of the climate change. But with the Pakistan's initiative, as the Prime Minister has shown an intent to go for a transition of on the renewable energy sources, I think it is a very positive step, and it is a very positive message to the international community to come forward and join hands with the developing countries by contributing more into the climate financing. Well, I believe that climate financing is a different subject than the loss and damages itself, because majority of the climate financing goes into the renewable energy. Either it is by the different states or it is by the mega production companies of the world. So it was previously discussed that it requires for at least a decade $100 billion a year, which we have seen that commitments remained only commitments and they were not materialized. So I think again, and I reiterate that the developed countries will
This has
have to come forward.
also been mentioned by Mr. Umar. Now, why not materialize since 2009 pledge of $100 billion? So, what do you think hampers the leading contributors when it comes to emissions to not deliver to that particular pledge?
All these decisions are taken by human beings. And indigenously, there is a political economy associated to each financial decision. So each of the political party leader, if they are in government, they have to take decisions which directly favor their masses. So there is an indigenous pressure of taking smart financial decisions, which most of the time hinder the international leaders to allocate more for the climate financing. And as my colleague has mentioned, that the climate financing seems to be an unsustainable solution right at the moment, because there is no permanent source of financing which has not yet been defined by any of the mechanisms. On the other hand,
so
there is
when it comes to political decision making, when we talk about this particular phenomenon of climate change, doesn't it affect everybody globally equally?
It does.
So why do you think there doesn't happen to be a realization when it comes to the developed countries in particular, and especially when the United Nations Secretary General himself repeatedly says that it's not the matter of charity, rather it's the matter of climate justice, and the developed world needs to pay in form of reparations to the developing world?
Well, I don't want to mention, because that would be a bit different from the subject, but you have seen that a little heed is paid to the request of United Nations. Right at the moment, we have observed that Israel has been constantly bombing in a narrow strip in Gaza, and nobody is saying that there can be a climate impact of that much of bombing on the globe as well. So I think that an international political economy is also a factor which makes the political leaders think more about catching the hands of affairs of the power in the world. So I think that the attention is not towards, serious attention towards the climate change and global temperature increase beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius is a missing link by the international community.
Right. Mr. Umar, what's your understanding when it comes to this phenomenon of climate change affecting everybody equally around the globe? Not only the developing world, we have also seen severe heat waves, also floods over in the developing countries, and this particular year being said as the hottest summer recorded ever. So, I mean, what hampers towards that particular will of doing something in concrete terms when it comes to the responsibility of the developed world?
So a lot of the pollution that is happening right now, for instance, in the U.S., in European capitals, they want the Chinese to foot more of the bill. However, it is not that simple. A lot of the pollution, for instance, which is being emitted by China, by India, is American and Western companies that have outsourced it, that have their factories there, that are polluting over there, and then they're asking the Chinese and the Indians to pay the bill. So the real issue here is climate justice. Now, the global north has been blessed with geography, in that, for instance, if climate change accelerates, one potential is that Russia could have warm water ports. So climate change, yes, everyone is in it. However, certain regions of the globe are being devastated more by climate change. For instance, South Asia, the Persian Gulf, which as per the UN will become unlivable by 2100, the way the temperatures are rising. So countries like Germany, countries with colder climates like Canada, like the United States, they have suffered, but they have not suffered on the scale that countries like Pakistan have suffered. So they do not feel the pain that people in Pakistan, people in Bangladesh, and people in the Gulf are feeling.
So what about hurricanes or the tropical cyclones? Hurricanes, when we talk about the Atlantic Ocean and the two countries that you've just mentioned.
It is affecting them, but the scale of the devastation that we've seen that has focused everyone's attention in Pakistan, for instance, a third of the country's people were underwater. Now, for a similar catastrophe in the US, that would be 130 million people. even the worst American disasters, Hurricane Katrina and among others, they have not been on that scale to elicit a public response in favor of doing something about it. And also because the narrative there is controlled by corporate America, by the energy sector, by people who are benefiting from it. So they are also shaping the narrative and moving people away from issues such as climate to other issues, trying to distract the public. And that is a major problem in Western capitals in the US as well.
Right, Mr. Waqar, when we talk about United Nations Secretary General, and now his statement is that he's urged the world leaders that they should aim for a complete phase out of fossil fuels.
Yeah.
Now, how do you analyze this? How much that particular thing is doable, and for how much time do you think the effort would be required?
There are two things. There is a criticism by the civil society internationally that the COP28 is headed by a person who is a fossil fuel executive by the UAE. But similarly, at the same time, there is a positive aspect to it, that the similar person is also is in charge of the renewable energy project for the UAE. So I think he's in a better position to understand, to pick up between the options. And I believe that it is a very positive decision for the international community. But with regards to transition from the fossil fuel, I think there is again a lack of commitment. As I have previously mentioned in one of the programs, that by 2030 or 2035, I didn't remember exactly, Germany has decided to go on 100% renewable energy vehicles. And these are definitely the electric vehicles. And Chile would be responsible for providing lithium for those batteries, which will be utilized in Germany. And we all know that lithium processing is a water-intensive process. And there has been an estimate that it will consume 70 to 80% of the fresh waters of Chile to fuel all the electric vehicles for Germany or for all of the Europe. So I believe, as my colleague has said, that international community, especially the Western side, the Europe, is paying cost of the climate change, but it is in their favor. Economically, it is in their favor. The average temperature increase may benefit in a way to very cold countries like Canada, like my colleague has said that Russia can have another port because at the moment it is freezed over there. I believe that there is a serious lack of commitment by the developed world towards the climate change. And I think that the transition from the fossil fuel towards renewable energy would be merely a slogan for next 5 to 10 years. And I don't see any positive progress, tangible progress from the first world towards
But if
achieving
there is a serious commitment and all the world leaders at the end of this particular historic summit, COP28, come out with kind of a unanimous understanding that yes, this is a direction here we have to start from. So how much time do you think with that particular unanimous, concerted, serious effort, this particular transition can happen?
How we measure a serious commitment? I made a commitment that I'll be there in your program tomorrow and I don't come and I don't show up. Does it call a serious commitment? There was a Paris Pact in 2016, and each alternate year they take a stock taking of that progress. And this stock taking has been going to done in COP28 as well. And the report has been published in this September, which has said that the commitments made in 2026 cannot be achieved. The commitment made in during the Paris Agreement could not be achieved. So I again reiterate that there is a serious gap in making the serious commitment by the international community. And international community will have to realize that controlling the climate change without effective and efficient climate financing is barely a nightmare.
Mr. Umar, what's your understanding when it comes to this particular statement by United Nations Secretary General of completely urging the world leaders to go for completely phasing out the fossil fuels?
Fossil fuel usage can be curtailed, the dependence on it can be curtailed. However, a completely ending use of fossil fuels does not seem something which is possible in the near to medium future. However, yes, serious reduction in fossil fuel usage will have a very positive impact on the environment. For instance, during the COVID lockdowns, air quality improved dramatically all over the world just because people were not driving cars. So we can have a huge impact with relatively little intervention if the will is there. And it's not that the will has never been there for anything. For instance, in the 80s, when it became public knowledge that the ozone layer over Antarctica was being destroyed, CFCs were phased out, and they're no longer a part of our lives. So if the right political commitment is there over time, obviously, actions speak louder than words, but over time, if that political commitment is there, the world does have the technology and the means to tackle the issue of climate change.
So what's required when we talk about the manifestation of that real serious commitment from the major world powers?
So because different countries have different energy issues. For instance, Europe is more proactive regarding climate change because they are energy dependent on oil imports from the Middle East. Whereas the US, for instance, has its own oil and gas and its own coal. It is not as serious or as vocal. The Chinese are not as vocal because they have their own coal. So countries are currently looking at climate change partly through a lens of energy security rather than just climate change per se. And for instance, the UAE, it's a major exporter of energy. However, it's also a major victim of climate change. So countries in the global south need to get together and to encourage countries in the global north, in Europe, the US, Canada, and elsewhere, to improve their practices. And if the right amount of public pressure is there, action's possible. The technology is there.
The technology is there. Do you think we need more advancement in that technology? And when it comes to energy security that you've just mentioned, many of the countries are more focused on ensuring their energy security. Ideally, during the transition period, what could be the major alternatives that could fulfill that scale of the demand?
So, for instance, for a country like Pakistan, solar is having revolutionary changes. The cost of solar power has gone down dramatically. In fact, the UAE is producing the cheapest electricity in the world through a solar power plant. So solar, I believe, is something which can be quickly scaled up, and it can be rolled out in countries which are most affected. Even Germany, which does not get that much sunlight, is generating more than 70% of its electricity through solar energy. So I believe that one technology which can have an immediate impact is more use of solar for generation of electric power.
Right, that can provide a scale.
It can be easily scaled up.
When it comes to meeting that scale of demand.
It can be easily scaled up. The transport and logistics sector are more difficult because we don't have systems which run buses on solar right now, not on a large enough scale. However, solar power, I believe, can have a very good impact and have a very sizable emissions reduction as well.
Right. Mr. Waqar, what's your understanding when we talk about that immediate alternative in order to phase out fossil fuels with that scale of the demand?
Well,
ensure that energy security.
Well, in terms of renewable energy with driving cars and vehicles, we are much behind than the international community, since we could not establish a tangible amount of any such fueling stations which are run by the renewable energy, that is for the electric cars. And with regards to the solar panels, as my colleague has mentioned, I think that the tariff barriers have been reduced drastically in Pakistan, and there are absolutely no duties on solar panels right at the moment, which has translated into a drastic reduction into the amount consumed for the solar panels. And this will provide a private sector with an opportunity to go for the renewable energy sources, which is actually the goal of climate financing. So in a way, yes, we can have a transition, a fast transition, a robust transition towards renewable energy if we provide more renewable sources. But I think that there is a potentially unexplored area in Pakistan. We can produce more than 50,000 megawatts with the hydel power, and we have quite much to explore in this potential area, which we have not so far.
Okay, so Mr. Umar has just mentioned the example of Germany.
Yeah.
If I'm correct, 70% is getting from solar power. I mean, when we talk about those countries which usually don't get that much of exposure to sun, I mean, what could be their immediate source of transition from fossil fuels to
As
the
I have
other?
mentioned, that they are going towards the electric cars, but there is a dark side to it, that it is a lithium intensive sector, and lithium is not, processing of lithium is not again climate friendly. It consumes fresh water, which we are already lacking in the globe. So I think on the other hand, it is an eye washer for the global community, because on one hand, Europeans will be having more clean environment to breathe, but the cost of that would be paid like third world countries, like within the Europe is Chile, and in our zone is Afghanistan and rest of the countries. So I think that this is again an issue of climate justice, which is a missing link for the first worlds at the moment.
Right, Mr. Umar, other than solar energy, those countries which don't have that much of exposure to the sun, what could be their immediate alternatives?
Small hydroelectric dams for countries that are water rich, as my colleague mentioned. Also, solar does not require a lot of sunlight. Germany is doing it, and other countries, the majority of the globe gets a lot more sunlight than Germany does. Other potential options include wind energy, tidal energy. With hydroelectric power, what we have seen in Pakistan is that successively governments have gone for huge projects. We've built huge projects, but those were built in the 60s and the 70s. Pakistan needs quicker solutions which can materialize in the short to medium term, rather than something which will only yield results 15, 20 years from now. So we need to, I believe, focus more on smaller, local, for instance, local dams, run off the river dams, to generate electricity as an alternative to very expensive and imported oil, for instance. So one of our biggest issues in this country, along with climate, is the cost of electricity, which can dramatically go down if we stop relying on imported oil and even imported coal. Pakistan, even though it has a lot of coal, is importing coal under the CPEC power projects and is paying in foreign currency, which we're already pretty short of.
Perhaps that's because of the grading of the coal that is present over here.
There is the technology that can clean the coal to the point that they can be used in power plants. They are not exceptionally high quality, but they are good for electricity.
Right. So when we talk about the scale of the demand, when we segregate it in terms of the demand from industry, when we talk about the demand at the domestic level, and when we talk about the kind of transportation that we do have around the globe. Now, when we are going through a transition period, do you think all these three areas are going to be dealt with the same source of renewable energy, or one renewable energy source could be more efficient for one side only?
So obviously, different areas would need different solutions. However, for electricity, that is the first thing which can be easily switched over. Electric power generation. Transport and logistics will be more tricky. It'll need a combination, for instance, maybe biofuels, maybe hydrogen. Other solutions are also coming on.
So when you specifically talk about transport, I mean, the kind of transport we do already have, that already exists, its volume is very huge. So what about that? Even if we go towards a very efficient renewable energy source in future, or even in near future, in order to cater to the demand of this particular sector? What about which already exists?
So currently, biodiesel, for instance, it's already ethanol. A lot of vehicles, for instance, in Brazil, have already been converted to use ethanol. They've been converted to use diesel and ethanol mixtures. We can reduce our consumption. Yes, it will not cut them out completely. We'll still be using diesel, we'll still be using petrol. However, we can reduce its consumption.
Right. Mr. Waqar, when you talk about the solar, the capacity, do you think it has that capacity when we specifically talk about the case of Pakistan, when it comes to meeting the scale of demand as far as the industry is concerned?
Well, Jawad, it gives me another click that there is an indirect way of going towards the more clean environment, and that is controlling your population. The global average growth rate of population is 0.8%, while our official figure is 1.9%. That is more than the double of the average global rate. So with this growth rate, we need more energy, more food, more clean water, and majority of anything, which is again pollution intensive activities throughout the country. So with this, we can have an indirect solution towards the clean environment. But as you have mentioned, can the solar panels provide enough energy to fuel the overall energy requirement of Pakistan? The simple answer is no. It is independently not adequate. There are alternate methods, as my colleague has mentioned, because whenever we think about dam, we think that the dams are for water reservoirs, but for the energy generation, there is a lack of commitment obvious in our country towards a dependence of electricity generation on the run of the river, which has a huge potential in Pakistan. Right in the northern areas, we have more than 50,000 megawatt potential, which is unexplored at the moment. So I think we'll have to adopt a combinational approach by controlling our population, providing more renewable energy, that is hydel, that is solar, and taking more measures towards the infrastructure that supports the resilient infrastructure for the climate-induced calamities. Yeah.
How to increase that resilience? I'll take your detailed view regarding that. Mr. Umar, now when in case of Pakistan, as Mr. Waqar has mentioned, population to be a major factor regarding the needs now. When it comes to energy need, of course, the more the population, the energy needs are going to be even bigger in demand. How to deal with that particular issue?
So the birth rate in Pakistan, as is the case globally, is declining from the historic highs that we used to have. However, it is still the highest rate in the region, and education is the best way forward. People are not aware. People do not know of the alternatives that they can have to a large family. They are not aware of the benefits that smaller families can bring. So I believe continuing education is the best way to control the population.
Is there anything of incentivizing the people with the smaller families as compared to those who have bigger families? Could a mechanism of that sort also be introduced in order to check?
That is something which can be done. Population control should never be coercive, as was the case in some countries where they forcefully limited family size to one child. However, if a system is devised which incentivizes people to have, let's say, 2 children, let's say tax breaks, for instance, or a subsidy, or for families with smaller family sizes, having, for instance, some form of health insurance. So yeah, I believe that is something we can work with.
Mr. Waqar, your view regarding incentivizing the smaller families in order to have that very check when it comes to population control?
Right at the moment, we are doing an inverse thing in Pakistan, and I have previously mentioned that in our conditional cash transfer programs, we are offering the families with conditional cash transfer on enrollment of children in the schools. And in this program, we have not barred it with any of the limit of the children. It means as many children a family can have, the state will be providing as many benefits to the family. So we'll have to adopt an inverse approach towards incentivizing the limited family size in Pakistan. There is no other option right at the moment in Pakistan.
Okay, so here's the scenario. If there is a serious commitment by all the major stakeholders around the globe phasing out of fossil fuels, not completely, but to an extent where it goes to limit that particular target which has been agreed at Paris Climate Agreement. Now, with that commitment being implemented, do you think the adverse impacts or the adverse things which have already been caused to the environment are going to reduce with the same scale, or the effects of it will keep coming in the coming years also? And if yes, then in order to reduce the adverse impacts of any climate catastrophe that happens in future, resilience, do you think building resilience is of crucial importance?
So it is a very comprehensive question, and it takes a detailed
Please go ahead.
Answer. With regards to the pace of repair towards the climate change, I think nobody can precisely say that what would be the pace if all the negative activities are stopped even today. But since we have observed some of the changes during the COVID, where the international flights and the international movements and industry and everything was
But of
at
course,
halt.
not everything can come to a halt,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah.
that was an extraordinary time.
In a way, we are giving a message to nature that with the calamity like COVID or with a disaster like COVID, we can respond in a positive way. But with our own intention, we are not ready to surrender our daily activities. These activities are taking us towards a global temperature rise, which is in itself is the deadliest phenomena for the global population. So global population will have to understand that it's our mutual responsibility to fight with the climate change. And with regards to resilient, there is a climate action which requires another detail, that what climate action is actually is and what does it require from the international community. But I think with the inclusivity of including the local communities, providing more awareness to the masses and taking them on board, we can achieve with a slower pace,
the resilience,
the climate action.
Do you mean the resilience of infrastructure to withstand any sort of climate
Resilience
catastrophe that
again
happens?
has two facets. One, resilience is against the increasing global temperature, which again needs a climate action, which is again dependent on climate financing. And the other is coping up with the climate-induced calamities. With this regard, since the frontline countries which are affected by the climate-induced calamities are third world countries like Pakistan and rest of the countries in the region. So we are again lacking the infrastructure, like in terms of floods. In many of the areas of Pakistan, we observed that there were no safer places for the local community to be evacuated and to be transported during the raise of the floodwaters. So with regards to the infrastructure, that is the water courses, that is the infrastructure that is resilient against the earthquakes, against the tornadoes or against the heat waves, it is lacking in all the third world, which is again a financial or financial intensive activity.
Right, Mr. Waqar, Sherazi, expert disaster response, thank you very much for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Mr. Umar, Farooq, policy analyst, thank you very much for your time also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's show. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.